I want to listen first, and I want to get all of your reactions to something that Senator Ron Johnson said. Let's listen.
Many of the marchers were families with small children. Many were elderly, overweight, or just plain tired or frail, traits not typically attributed to the riot-prone. Many wore pro-police shirts or carried pro-police black and blue flags. Although the crowd represented a broad cross-section of Americans, mostly working class by their appearance and manner of speech, some people stood out. A very few didn't share the jovial, friendly, earnest demeanor of the great majority. Some obviously didn't fit in, and he describes 4 different types of people: plainclothes militants, agents provocateurs, fake Trump protesters, and then disciplined, uniformed column of attackers. I think these are the people that probably planned this. The vast majority of Trump supporters are pro-law enforcement, and the last thing they would do is violate the law.
I will say that information I've received from some of my officers where they were trying to prevent people from coming into the building, and people were showing up saying, hey, we're police, let us through, and still wanting to violate the law to get inside the building.
I mean, Charles, you have the former chief there completely contradicting what Senator Ron Johnson is saying. What did you think of that really conspiracy theory that Senator Johnson is propagating?
Well, first of all, I didn't think much of it. I think that it's pretty clear that not everyone who shows up at a rally is there to commit acts of violence or even thought about trying to breach the Capitol. But there was obviously a very significant number of people that really did want to do that. And there was some planning that was associated with that. So this is a very serious issue that hopefully it can kind of keep politics out of this as much as possible and spin and that sort of thing. This was a very serious incident. There were a lot of breakdowns that took place. We're lucky that more people weren't seriously injured or killed as a result of this. So this is no place to be trying to put some kind of political spin on what took place. I think most reasonable people would understand to begin with that the majority of people who show up for a rally, whatever the cause, aren't there to really cause damage or insurrection or things like that. But it doesn't mean it didn't take place, and it doesn't mean that there was a radicalization that took place that really, I think, really caused a lot of this to take place.
Yeah, Gloria, what do you think? This is also, we should mention, the same senator who questioned whether this was an armed insurrection, because he said, when I think of armed, I think of firearms. And I mean, just to fact check that, there were arrests that did have to do with firearms, but there were also a number of weapons that clearly were not firearms, but were deadly weapons.
Well, I think it's total rubbish. I think he has a political agenda. He wasn't listening to the people who were actually there trying to fight the insurrectionists. You'll also recall that Johnson wasn't sure this was actually an insurrection. I don't know what he thought it was. Did he think it was a walk in the park? And what Mr. Sun said, he said these people came with equipment and with climbing gear. These are people intent on getting into that Capitol one way or another. If you were just going to a Trump rally, you could just listen to the former president and whatever he was saying and then go your merry way. And there were lots of people who did that. But the people who invaded the Capitol had an agenda, and that's what the police were saying today. And they were saying, look, we weren't prepared. We didn't have enough intelligence. We didn't have enough equipment. We needed the National Guard. We didn't get it fast enough. But the one thing they did not say over and over again was that this was not an insurrection. They all agreed. They raised their hands or nodded their heads and said, we all agree.
And Peter, the former Capitol Hill police chief, revealed he hadn't seen that FBI memo that warned of violence. How does something like that fall through the cracks?
Well, it shouldn't. There's a term sometimes we use, and it's law enforcement's biggest enemy is complacency, or in this day and age, as it was said by the senators most times, is this is nothing should have been emailed. So in the term of the report writer, the JTTF's point at Norfolk or Washington field office, they shouldn't have been complacent about that memo. It should have been, a phone call should have been made. I've done that numerous times in my FBI career to my peers, to other commanders that I work with and other team leaders. When I saw something that came across my desk, or the Bureau saw something that came across my desk or somebody else's desk, that it had to be actioned immediately. That's not done via just hitting send and forget about it. If you want to hit send, that's one thing, but then you follow up with a phone call saying, have you received that email I just sent? You need to take a few minutes and read it and then call me back. Or we can do a video call, or you can come into my office immediately, or I'll come to your office and I'll hand deliver it if you didn't get it. So there's no excuse for that. So that's kind of a failure as well. And unfortunately, that happens too often. And when we're living off of devices and media and phones and email on phones, that people just send things and they don't necessarily follow up on it.
And Charles, I think a lot of people, having looked at what happened on January 6th, they said, why was Capitol Police not prepared for this? The former chief answered that question, saying essentially that any civilian law enforcement force would not be prepared for something like this without having the assistance of some other type of agency, whether it's other law enforcement agency or military. What did you think about his answer?
Well, I mean, you raised a good point there, because the one thing that wasn't talked about during this hearing, there was a lot of emphasis on the National Guard being activated or not being activated in a timely fashion. But that department has MOUs in place with other surrounding law enforcement agencies. And these are substantial agencies: Fairfax County, Arlington, Montgomery, Prince George's, obviously MPD. They are there, and they're very well trained and very well equipped. And it's not unusual for them to come into the district. I used them quite a bit, quite frankly, whenever we had a large demonstration, in order to provide some assistance. So, listen, you could hit a point where, you just get overwhelmed. But I do believe that they were not as prepared as they could have been. I think that they got a little smug in terms of, well, this has never happened before. I heard Mike Stinger say, we plan based on probability, not possibility. Well, the whole point of tabletops, I mean, you have to look at different possibilities to find out how prepared are you should the worst case scenario take place. Obviously, that didn't happen. They're not properly equipped. I mean, 4 platoons, that's 160 people out of a force of 1,400 that are fully equipped with riot gear. I mean, that kind of stuff is just unacceptable. I'm sorry.
Also, I don't think we heard, the answer to why that FBI memo, which was a flashing red light, why that was only issued right before. I mean, if all the information was out there on social media, et cetera, why was that so late in coming? Never mind, why wasn't it distributed quickly? Why didn't they see it at all before January 6th? I mean, that's kind of remarkable to me when you think about it. And also, we didn't really hear that much about the National Guard and why it was so slow in getting the National Guard to the Capitol. I think that's another chapter of the story that involves high levels in the administration and the vice president, the former vice president, and the former president. And I think we have a lot to learn about that.
Yeah, and there are going to be other opportunities,
Yeah.
right? This is the first in a series of hearings that we expect many, many more questions to be answered. Gloria, Peter, thank you so much, Charles,
Sure.
as well. Really appreciate it.